If you're a content creator, a vlogger, or perhaps someone who wants to start out making videos, perhaps your own YouTube channel, then I think the Canon EOS M50 might be a good option as a mirrorless camera that is light, compact, and actually packs a whole bunch of features. Hey, what up? It's your boy MobbJustice back again with another video, and for today we are doing something slightly different. We're going to be taking a look at some camera gear. I've done a couple of reviews on different gadgets in the past. You can see some of those such as the JBL clip, as well as the Android TV boxes, that type of thing, and a lot of laptops. But for today we're looking at cameras, more specifically the EOS M50. As always, this video is brought to you by the team over at Lion Media. Head on over to check out some of the crispiest photo, video, and audio content. That's www.lionmedia.com. Head on over, check it out, and just see what the team can do for you. Now, as I said, this is something a little bit different, simply because we tend to talk about business models and new product announcements, and we've reviewed a number of gadgets in the past, but this is the first sort of camera review. And I've actually said it a number of times, I am a content creator, and as part of Lion Media we do a lot of photo and video content for ourselves in-house and for a lot of clients, so we actually work with cameras quite a lot. Now, the reason why I'm picking the M50 is because this is the main camera that's actually used for these videos that you see. I guess not for today because we actually have it in hand, but any other video that you've seen probably over the last year and a half has been through this little guy. As I said, we've been working with cameras for many years now, primarily DSLR style cameras. I'm a Canon user, so all my cameras are Canons, and the M50 happens to be my first mirrorless camera. Got it about maybe 2.5, almost 3 years now. That's how long I've had this little camera for, and it was my first mirrorless camera. I started out with the DSLR, a Canon 760D, and my latest mirrorless camera is this is the EOS RP. Really dope camera, but you can see that in terms of body style, very similar, but the M50 is a much smaller body. Now, right off the bat, I think the M50 for me in my own uses is primarily a video type camera. As I said, this is what is primarily driving this particular channel, and I use it on other productions, but photos for me, it's never really been something that I like for that. In terms of specs, I'm going to put the specs somewhere over here, and you'll see, but a couple of standout features. It's got really good autofocus. It's one of the reasons why I actually switched over to using this as my main camera for these types of videos, because it needs to be able to follow me as I make movements around the screen. And then you've got a 24 megapixel stills on that side, plus at the same time you do have the ability to shoot in 4K. Looking at the pros of this camera, I want to start off with the size. It is a nice small compact body. When you do compare it with something like the RP, you do see that it is a much smaller body that you are dealing with, so it works really well from that point of view. As I said just now, one of the other things that I enjoy is the autofocus, and I find it to work very well. Generally, Canons are known for really good autofocus on the side of stills, but especially when it comes to video, and I've really enjoyed how it works on that end. And that video quality is quite crisp. I really like the type of video that comes out of this camera. As long as you get your settings correct, I really like it. But the other reason why I switched over to this camera as opposed to the 760D I was using in the past is that I found this one to have a more flexible ISO range, right? Because the other one will go, let's say, from ISO 100, 200, 400, 800, whereas the M50 has other numbers in between that actually allow you to dial in your exposure a little bit finer from that point of view. Some other pros, it carries with it an EVF, that is an electronic viewfinder. So basically when you look inside the little viewfinder, it's actually electronic. It's different from a DSLR where you can actually see what the lens is seeing. This is electronic, which means you can follow video when you're taking video, or you can actually look at images just by peering inside that. As it was my first mirrorless camera, I thought that feature was cool. And then the other one is the fact that there is a mic input, so you can put an external microphone on top of this particular camera. And the camera actually carries with it a simplified menu system that's actually meant for I'd say beginners, because usually you've got your beginners, your mid-range, and then you've got your pro level sort of users. So this seems to be aimed more at the beginner level, and it does have a set of menus that allows you to do a lot of things quite automatically, very simplified, very well. But it also offers the flexibility that if you want to dial in a more manual sort of way of doing things, then you do have that ability of using the traditional Canon menu that you'll see on other higher end DSLRs. And that simplified menu structure brings me on to some of the M50's cons, starting off with the fact that the camera is laid out so simply. As I said, it is something that seems to be targeted more towards people that are starting out, or people that don't want too much fuss when it comes to a camera. And what that results in is that dialing in ISO, shutter speed, and your aperture becomes quite hard, because when you use other types of DSLRs, even the 760D that I'm currently shooting this on, you have a specific dial that you can do your aperture on. You have a dial just for your shutter speed, and then you can do your ISO quite easily. There's a specific button for it. But for you to do the same thing on the M50, it usually takes a number of steps for you to be able to dial in certain things. So this is not the camera to use if you are at an event, especially a wedding, where you need to constantly be adapting to, let's say, shifting light. Maybe you're in a club, or there's a dance floor at a wedding, and you constantly need to be changing all of those things. It will frustrate you. Coupled with that is the fact that there are very limited video shooting options that are available on the M50. Usually you have a host of different frame rates and different resolutions. Let's say 24 FPS for your HD, or 30 frames per second for 4K, 60 frames, whatever it is. But when you are using the M50 for video, there are very few options that are available. The 760D, for example, has two options when it comes to video. One that creates really big files, and one that creates only small files, right? And right now the M50 only has the option where you create big files. So if you're going to be using the M50, that's something else to consider as well, that the file sizes are probably going to be quite large. The other bit is that this carries the EFM mount, which means that the lenses are going to be a little bit pricey, something to think about. And then the battery life is really not the best, and the batteries themselves are much smaller than some of the other cells that I've used in the past, so that's something else to think about. And earlier on we spoke about the size of the camera, really nice, compact, but what it means is that if you are recording and you have the camera placed on a tripod, for example, there's certain mounts where the tripod mount is wider than where the door is, and this is one of those cameras where the battery and the SD card are located on the bottom. So if you're on a shoot, perhaps a longer shoot, you have to take the camera off the entire thing to replace batteries, to replace SD cards if they get full. Something else to think about. And then, like with almost every Canon camera that I've ever shot with, 29 minutes and 59 seconds, or roughly 30 minutes. That is the maximum shooting time. I really wish they would extend this. Some pro tips: if you find yourself buying this camera, then I highly suggest that you get yourself the EF adapter. Basically, that allows you to use an adapter that you can put all the lenses on the camera, and then that actually couples with the second bit is, I would say rather invest in some of the older lenses such as the EF lenses, because Canon has a whole range of those, whereas the EF M lenses, there's a much smaller range and they are a little bit more pricey. So I would actually suggest that, and they're a little bit more versatile on the EF side. The third thing is to download something called Adobe DNG Converter. There are other pieces of software that do the same thing, but basically the M50, I said I use it primarily for video. For those that do use it as a photo camera, and for those that shoot in RAW, it creates files called CR3 files, and those files aren't always readable in Lightroom. So what you need is to do a conversion of the files to DNG so that you can edit them in Lightroom. I've used RAW on Canon cameras for years, and it's primarily been CR2, and that gets read quite easily by Lightroom, so just something else to consider. And then the other one is that if you're going to shoot, we do a lot of shooting of, let's say, podcast sessions or interview type of situations where you have a number of cameras, and I use only Canons because usually the colors are about the same. But I have noticed that the images, even when you dial down all of the dials and you get as neutral a profile as possible, the colors that come out of the M50 tend to be quite saturated compared to the likes of the RP and the 760D that I do use. So who is this camera for? I think that's an important question, and I'd say if you're a vlogger, someone who needs to hold up your camera in front of your face, something that's lightweight, you travel a lot, this camera is for you. If you find yourself in the professional space, I think it makes a really good B or C camera, for a second, or a third angle. But as a primary shooter, it might be a bit tough because of the issues that I mentioned earlier on, especially taking out batteries, SD cards, etc. It's tough from that point of view. And then the third thing is, if you use gimbals, right? I use a Ronin SC, and that's one of DJI's smaller gimbals, so the size of the M50 works quite perfectly with this camera. But more than anything else, I think this camera is really great for people that you're a non-pro, you want to get into the world of cameras, but you don't really know what's happening, you want to learn. So that simplified menu system I mentioned earlier on, and that ability to then switch to the pro menus, I think it will be a nice sort of way to learn how to use cameras, and then learning how to dial in your shutter speed, your ISO, and how camera systems work. And at the same time, it's a mirrorless camera, which means you are sort of with the current technology where things are, because there is that shift towards more mirrorless cameras. So I think it would be a good buy from that point of view. In conclusion, I really do think that the M50 does offer really good value. You can actually find these cameras because there is a Mark II of the M50 that was recently released. I think that was last year, and for me personally, the feature set that came with that camera wasn't enough to make me feel any type of FOMO to want to upgrade or anything like that. So I really do think that if you're someone who's looking for something lightweight, perhaps you're a vlogger, someone starting out in terms of video creation, or someone who's looking for a good BOC camera, something that can shoot in 4K. And actually on the 4K point, that's actually something I forgot to mention earlier on about the camera. One of its cons is the fact that it does shoot in 4K, but it has a cropped image. So if your image is, let's say, this big, right, when you go into 4K, it's going to zoom in and have a smaller part of the sensor that's actually being used to capture capture the video. Something to definitely think about, because that affects your distances between your subject, etc. So if you are holding the camera just in front of you and then you switch to 4K, right, it's going to crop in as if your camera is really close to you. So that's something to think about. I hardly shoot in this 4K profile. So that's been it for this video. You can let us know what you think. Have you ever used the M50? What camera do you use? Are you a DSLR shooter? Are you a mirrorless sort of person, right? What has been your experience? You can also tell us, you know, if you're a content creator, what type of gear you are using, and perhaps if you want to see more videos like this in the future, let us know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.
Hey, this is Baby G and you're watching the MobbJustice channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Live it, love it, like it. This is the MobbJustice TV.